July 26, 1944, 12,000 feet above Saint-Dizier, France. A strange silver shape sliced through the clouds. No propeller. No sound. Just a sudden, rising howl like a banshee. Hauptmann Karl-Heinz Becker pulled back the stick. The mountain swung forward, faster than anything he had ever flown. Beneath him, a formation of P-47 Thunderbolts struggled to climb. He didn't bother with formation tactics. He didn't need them. 2 seconds later, his cannon burst, tore through the lead Thunderbolt. Wings ripped. Smoke trailed. The American spiraled down. No time to radio, no time to breathe. Carl laughed into his headset. They can't even turn fast enough to aim. He leveled off, banking west. This is the future, he muttered, and we are its masters. But he didn't know that was the first kill by a jet in human history. And for Germany, it was also the beginning of the end. The idea was born in quiet desperation, long before the war turned against them. In late 1942, deep inside a hangar at Augsburg, engineers from Messerschmitt sketched what looked like a science fiction fantasy. A twin-engine jet fighter that could reach speeds over 500 miles per hour. They called it the Project 1065, but in secret, they whispered something else. The miracle weapon. By 1943, the Luftwaffe was bleeding. American bombers rained destruction over Hamburg, Essen, Stuttgart. Every morning, fewer German fighters returned. Every evening, more factories turned to ash. But the jet was different. It was sleek, shark-like, with no propellers and swept wings. Its heart, the Junkers Jumo 004 turbojet, a turbine that screamed like thunder. Test pilot Fritz Wendell took her up first. On July 18, 1942, he lifted off with shaking hands and landed grinning like a madman. "It flies," he said, "and nothing can catch it." At Lechfeld Airfield, Hauptmann Karl-Heinz Becker watched that first flight with his arms folded tight across his chest. He'd flown FW-190s, fast, deadly, rugged. But this was something else entirely. "It moves like a ghost," he said. "It doesn't fly. It tears the sky open." By summer 1943, Hitler summoned his generals. He looked at the Me-262 model on his desk, angular, unnatural. "A bomber," he ordered, "not just a fighter. I want it to carry bombs." The engineers went cold. The Me-262 wasn't built for weight. Adding bomb racks would ruin its performance. But nobody said a word. Carl heard rumors about the bomber demand. He spat. "We're fighting for the skies, not bombing bridges." Yet even as pilots like him dreamed of chasing bombers at Mach speeds, something darker crept behind the curtains. Each Jumo 004 engine lasted only 25 flying hours. Turbine blades cracked, bearings overheated, mechanics scrambled for parts that didn't exist. Fuel, high-octane jet fuel, was already running short. Worse, Allied bombing campaigns targeted production lines before a single jet squadron could deploy. Still, the propaganda flowed. The newspapers called it the Stormbird. Goebbels filmed it from heroic angles, flames licking the runway. It didn't matter that only 2 prototypes were flying. To the German public and to Carl, the jet was destiny. Our enemies still ride horses compared to this, he wrote in his flight log. He underlined the sentence twice. But the truth? Even in 1943, the Me-262 was already being outproduced by American factories before it even entered combat. August 1944, Lechfeld Airfield, Bavaria. The morning air was still, heavy with the scent of burnt oil and metal dust. Mechanics moved like ghosts around the Me-262s, their hands blackened from hours of work. Karl-Heinz Becker crouched beside his jet. The left engine wouldn't start. Swapped the igniter again? He asked. The technician nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. 3 times. We're out of replacements. Had to carve one from an old Jumo blade. Carl didn't flinch. He'd seen worse, a Me-262 explode on takeoff 2 days earlier. They said it was pilot error. Loose fuel valve, maybe. And nobody talked much about it. They couldn't afford to. The jet was still sacred. On paper, it flew like lightning. But in the field, reality whispered a different tune. Each startup now took 10, sometimes 15 minutes. Fuel pumps clogged. Landing gear failed to retract. Crews began cannibalizing grounded planes just to keep a single bird flying. But to Carl, these were bumps in the road. Growing pains, he told his squadron. We're rewriting history. That takes time. Still, something gnawed at the back of his mind. One afternoon, while waiting for a delayed fuel truck, he spotted a lone soldier staring at the jets. The man wore Luftwaffe blue, but his collar tabs were stained. A mechanic, rankless, tired. You ever wonder, the man said softly, if this war's moving faster than we can fix it? Carl chuckled, but didn't answer. He didn't want to. Later that week, a fellow pilot, Oberleutnant Weiss, crashed during landing. Brake failure. Skidded off the runway, flames erupting under the belly. He died in seconds. No ceremony, no funeral. Just another spare part lost. The next morning, Carl stood by the wreck. The engine casing was melted. The same engine model he was flying in 3 hours. He lit a cigarette, watched the smoke curl into the overcast sky, said nothing. But in that silence, the first crack had already opened. September 1944. Dutch skies burned orange with tracer fire. Karl-Heinz Becker dove through clouds at over 500 miles per hour. The Me-262 roared like a beast unleashed. Below him, a swarm of B-17s crawled toward Arnhem, their silver bellies bloated with bombs. His HUD locked. Cannons fired. One fortress burst into flame, trailing smoke like a dying comet. He banked hard left, but not for celebration. The fuel gauge blinked red. His tanks were half empty, and the auxiliary truck at Lechfeld hadn't arrived for days. The refinery at Pulitz had been hit last week. Fuel convoys scattered. Rumors said American saboteurs now blew up train lines at night. The war was changing, and fast. Back at the airfield, mechanics pulled the turbine from a crashed 262 to fix Carl's own. They'd run out of new parts a month ago. Every plane's now 2, a sergeant muttered. One flies, one dies. On the radio, chatter grew panicked. American Mustangs had adapted. They flew higher now, waited above cloud cover. They didn't chase. They ambushed. Carl had seen it himself. The week before, 2 162s never returned. One had burst mid-air. The other tried to outrun and couldn't. How? He asked. They turned inside his curve, the ground controller said. Waited for him to bleed speed on climb-out. Shot him in the back. The invincible jet hunted like prey. Later that evening, Carl stood near his aircraft as ground crews tinkered under flickering lights. One mechanic held up a cracked landing strut. "Do you know what this is?" Carl shrugged. "It's off a Heinkel 111. Different model. Wrong size, but it fits. If you bend it enough." They laughed, nervous, exhausted. That night, in his bunk, Carl studied his logbook. 8 kills, 4 sorties, 2 aborted missions, 3 delays due to fuel, 1 friend dead on takeoff. The numbers were tilting. He dreamed of his jet again. Silent, perfect, glowing in the sun, but in the dream, it never left the ground. Mid-September 1944, a captured map, smudged with oil, lay across the operations table. Karl-Heinz Becker stared at it, unblinking. Red lines stretched from the beaches of Normandy, deep into France, running along rail tracks, roads, even under rivers. "What is this?" he asked. An intelligence officer adjusted his glasses. "Pluto," he said. "Pipeline under the ocean." Carl frowned. "They're pumping fuel," the man added. "From tankers in England. Straight into France. 55,000 barrels a day. No drums, no convoys. Just pressure and pipe." Silence fell across the room. Outside, on the tarmac, one of Carl's Me-262s sat waiting, its tanks empty for the 3rd day in a row. A Soviet-built tanker truck had broken down again. The parts were months overdue. Inside the war shifted. Carl whispered, "They built a fuel line faster than we can deliver a canister." The officer nodded. Their engineers were laying pipe under artillery fire, 70 miles. In weeks. Carl thought of the last mission he'd flown. He'd aborted 10 minutes in. No fuel. Another pilot had switched to a bicycle to reach the airfield. The Luftwaffe was starving. Meanwhile, the Americans were swimming in gasoline. Later that night, Carl watched from the hangar doors as clouds rolled in. Somewhere beyond those hills, a river of Allied fuel pulsed like blood through steel veins. Jet power meant nothing without what made it burn. He reached into his coat, pulled out his flight gloves. They smelled like smoke and old leather. He folded them slowly and didn't look up again. October 1944. The wind howled over Lechfeld, rattling tin panels on the hangar roof. Karl-Heinz Becker sat inside, nursing cold coffee from a chipped mug. A mechanic handed him something wrapped in waxed cloth. "Found it in the back of a captured truck," the man said. "Thought you'd want to see." It was a newspaper. Stars and stripes. Printed in bold. American type. Ink still fresh. The headline read, "U.S. Aircraft. Output. Tops, 96,000. Carl stared. 96,000 aircraft. In a single year. He flipped the page. A photograph showed a young American pilot grinning beside a P-51 Mustang. Clean boots. Clean teeth. Behind him, a row of planes stretched beyond the camera's edge. Beneath the photo, the caption, 6 missions, 6 Mustangs. We fly, they fix. Carl set the paper down. He looked at his own hands, calloused, engine oil deep in every crease. They didn't have 6 of anything. Next to the coffee tin, a logbook lay open. It recorded 2 operational ME-262s that week. 3 others were being scavenged for usable parts. The remaining 5 had engine failure reports waiting on a signature. He turned another page of the paper. Baseball scores, Coca-Cola ads, a comic strip, then a short column from an Army quartermaster, a soldier named Boyd from Omaha. It read, "Each airfield receives 57 gallons a day. Our fuel trucks run 24/7. We've got more gasoline than we've got cans." Carl exhaled slowly. His jet hadn't flown in 4 days. Outside, the tarmac shimmered with puddles. One mechanic used rainwater to clean turbine soot. He returned to the photo of the Mustang pilot, that smile, that confidence. It wasn't arrogance, it was ease. As if war, for them, was a system, a process, not survival, just another Tuesday shift. And for the first time, Carl felt old, not in years, but in ideas. November 1944. The snow came early that year. It dusted the Me-262s in thin white sheets, covering their broken skins like shrouds. Karl-Heinz Becker stood beside Hangar 3, boots frozen to the concrete. Inside, silence. No engines, no drills, no shouting sergeants, just silence. Oberstleutnant Dietrich came limping across the airstrip. His greatcoat flapped behind him, too large now for a man who'd stopped eating full rations. He lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. Then he said it, quietly, like a priest giving last rites. "We never had a chance." Carl didn't reply. The older man continued. "By the time we flew the first jet, they had already won. We just didn't know it yet." He pulled something from his pocket. A photograph, aerial reconnaissance, dozens of American airfields in England. Every runway lined with bombers. Hundreds. "They don't even name their planes anymore," Dietrich said. "They number them." Carl remembered naming his own jet. Elvira, after his sister. He hadn't seen her in 2 years. Later that evening, 2 Me-162s were towed into the hangar for inspection. One had lost half its landing gear. The other's left engine had imploded on startup. No spare turbines, no kerosene, no instructions. The crews stood around in silence, waiting for orders that wouldn't come. Carl watched a young mechanic, barely 18, try to strip the bent cowling from an intake. He slipped, sliced his palm open. Blood dripped onto the cold floor. No medics, no bandages. He wrapped his hand in cloth and kept working. That night, in the officers' quarters, Dietrich opened a bottle of schnapps. He poured 2 glasses, set one in front of Carl. "You know what's worse than defeat?" he gasped. Carl shook his head. "Fighting like it still matters, when the war has already chosen." He didn't drink the schnapps. He just stared into it, as if answers floated at the bottom. That weekend, an American bombing run struck the munitions depot 4 miles west. Carl saw the glow before he heard the sound. It painted the clouds red. He didn't even flinch. He just said they don't sleep anymore, and neither did he. December 1944. Karl Heinz. Becker sat inside a captured staff car, engine off, breath fogging the windshield. In his lap, a reel of American news footage, scavenged from a downed reconnaissance plane. They'd set up a projector in the operations shed, blackout curtains drawn tight. The reel began with cheerful music. Trumpets, brass drums, then trucks, dozens of them, hundreds. The screen filled with olive-drab convoys moving down muddy French roads, headlights off, engines synchronized, carrying everything from ammunition to chocolate bars. A voice boomed over the film. This is the Red Ball Express, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Karl leaned forward. Standardized jeeps, interchangeable tires, fuel trucks with identical nozzles, every vehicle labeled with unit numbers and delivery time codes. One driver, a black soldier from Louisiana, waved at the camera, grinning. A sign on his truck read, "Keep 'em flying." Karl's brow furrowed. Then came the maintenance depots, rows of aircraft engines, all lined up, modular, identical. Mechanics didn't repair, they replaced. 4 bolts off, new engine in, done in 10 minutes. 10. He thought about his own Me-262. Grounded for 9 days because a turbine blade cracked, a blade that took a week to forge and 2 men to file by hand. The Americans built like it was a math problem. Germany built like it was a symphony, and the symphony was falling apart. The film ended with a wide shot of an Allied airfield near Paris. 4-engine bombers landed while fresh ones took off. In the corner of the screen, soldiers unloaded crates stamped Ford. USA. Karl said nothing. But in his chest something turned. It wasn't just that the Americans had more. It was that they had figured out how to have more without trying harder. They simplified and multiplied. And Germany? Germany was still sanding metal by candlelight. February 1945. Lechfeld was quiet now. No more test flights, no more formation runs, just a hangar full of cold machines and men who spoke less each day. Karl Heinz Becker paced between the jets, each one missing something, an engine, a wheel, a canopy. They were museum pieces before the war had even ended. He paused beside his own aircraft. Elvira, her right nacelle had been removed, bolts scattered on a tarp. A chalk note on the fuselage read, "Waiting for bearings." That wait had lasted 4 weeks. He found 2 engineers huddled over blueprints in the corner. One pointed to a wing schematic, tracing the lines with a pencil worn down to its wounded. "We designed this like it was for an art show," he muttered. "Every screw bespoke, every weld unique." The other engineer just shook his head. "The Americans build like farmers. Bolt, nut, done. One plane crashes, they fly another by morning." Karl stepped forward. "Are you saying we overdesigned?" The man gave a sad smile. "No, I'm saying we designed like we had time." That night, Karl sat in the officers' quarters with an old aircraft manual in his lap. It detailed the Me-262's startup procedure. 32 steps. half required tools. 2 needed parts only available from a single machine shop in Berlin, which had been bombed last month. By contrast, he remembered a clip from the newsreel. An American mechanic using a universal socket wrench, fitting it to 3 different aircraft types. No paperwork, no panic, just results. He opened a ration tin, stale bread, a lump of gray meat. The label read, "Property of the Wehrmacht, not for resale." Then he remembered the Stars and Stripes ad, Coca-Cola chilled in ice, handed to bomber crews with a wink. 2 different worlds. One was surviving. The other was producing joy. In the hangar, a jet turbine hissed, then popped. A mechanic cursed. They were trying to breathe life into a machine that didn't want to live anymore. Carl looked at his gloves, stiff with frost, cracked along the seams. He whispered, "We built her too perfect." No one heard him, but the war had, and it no longer cared. April 1945. The Reich was crumbling like wet stone. Factories gone. Rail lines shattered. Fuel depots abandoned. Still, the numbers kept coming, and Karl-Heinz Becker had learned to stop ignoring them. Germany had built just over 400 Me-262s. Of those, less than 300 ever saw combat. Most were grounded, missing engines, missing pilots, or simply stranded on airfields without fuel. In contrast, America built 96,000 aircraft in 1944 alone. That wasn't a statistic. It was a sentence. The U.S. manufactured more planes in 1 year than the Reich had bullets. And behind every one of those aircraft, a truck, a mechanic, a fuel hose, a full breakfast. At a forward command post, Carl found a captured U.S. logistics manifest. He read it slowly. 2,450 fuel trucks operating in the European theater. Each carries 750 gallons. Average turnaround time, 6 hours. That meant over 1.8 million gallons every day. Meanwhile, his base ration had dropped to 800 liters a week, barely enough to start 2 jets, let alone to fly them. He ran a finger down the page, found another line. Monthly aircraft, loss replacement rate, 1 to 1.2. In America, a lost plane meant a new one. In Germany, a lost jet meant 3 men stripped 1 wreck to keep another alive. Carl sat in the corner of the barracks, logbook open. His last mission had ended before it began. Cracked throttle linkage, no spares. He stared at the blank entry, then thought of something his commanding officer once whispered in the snow. They don't fight the same war we do. He was right. They fought a war of numbers, a war of logistics, a war that began not at the front, but in Detroit, in Pittsburgh, in Toledo, where steel bent to will and factories breathed like gods. Carl wrote one final line in his logbook. They used 1 million gallons to stop me. I had 2 jets. Then he closed it and never opened it again. May 1945. Silence hung over Lechfeld like fog. No engines, no shouting, no hope. Karl-Heinz Becker walked alone through the graveyard of jets. Wings bent, paint scorched, windshields shattered like old bones. The Me-262s lay still, their sleek bodies gutted, their names painted over with dust. He stopped beside his first aircraft. Elvira. Her tail was gone. Her nose caved in. A rusted chain coiled where the intake once gleamed. He rested, a gloved hand on the fuselage, now cold as stone. "This is the future," he had said once. Now the future was stripped for parts. An American Jeep rolled at by the hangar. 2 soldiers in clean jackets. One leaned out, holding a bottle. "Hey, flyboy," the soldier called, smiling. "Thirsty?" He tossed it underhand. Carl caught it. It was cold. Coca-Cola. The cap hissed as he twisted it off. Tiny bubbles rose, fizzing against glass. The same drink he'd seen in newspapers, in Stars and Stripes, handed to bomber crews who never seemed tired. He took a sip. Sweet. Ridiculously sweet. Across the airfield, a crane lifted another broken Me-262 onto a flatbed truck. It hung in the air like a crucified relic, once the fastest thing on Earth, now just aluminum weight. Carl turned away. As he walked, the glass bottle still in hand, he remembered that first kill. The howl of the jet, the burst of cannon, the way the P-47 spiraled down, helpless, slow, obsolete. He'd laughed into his radio. "They can't touch us," he'd said. He'd believed it. But now, months later, he stood in a wrecked empire, holding the enemy's drink, watching his miracle weapon rot in the mud. They hadn't beaten him with speed or tactics. They'd beaten him with supply chains, with lunch breaks, with Coca-Cola. And for the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt awe.